Struggling to keep up with the news? Well, we have your back, connecting the dots on our Metro's most impactful news stories and newsmakers. It's your Week Reviewed. Next.
Week in Review is made possible through the generous support of Dave and Jamie Cummings, Bob and Marlise Gorley, Smithfield Foods, Haas and Wilkerson Insurance, the Courtney S. Turner Charitable Trust, John H. Mize and Bank of America N.A. co-trustees, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome everyone, I'm Nick Haynes, and if it's not already clear, I really get excited about this time we get to spend together lifting up the hood on what's happening in our town. And I've got plenty of questions now for the answers from Fox 4 News reporter Shannon O'Brien, from the Call newspaper, senior writer Eric Wesson, and from the pages of your Kansas City Star, Colleen Nelson, and her editorial page colleague, Dave Helling. Is the presidential candidate party bus finally heading our way? Less than 2 weeks now before the Missouri presidential primary. We have news of your first chance to see these candidates in action. Did you want to take a selfie with Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren? Get a hug from Joe Biden, a high five from Mayor Pete? It looks like your best chance will be next weekend on Sunday, March 8th. That's when the Missouri Democratic Party has organized the Show Me Showdown at the Kansas City Convention Center. It all gets underway at 2 in the afternoon next Sunday. Shannon, you've been reporting on this. It's not a presidential debate. Candidates are invited to deliver a speech. Will all the big names be here?
Well, who knows? The Missouri Democratic Party isn't saying who's coming. They have said they have one person that's committed, somebody else who's close to committing, won't say who it is, won't say how many people they expect. And it's really going to depend upon, I think, what happens on Super Tuesday before, the March 8th event here. And you're right, it's not a forum, it's not a debate, because the DNC has rules about forums and debates and things like that. This is just a rally. It's really a stump fest where all of the candidates can get up, have their time, tell the Missouri voters what they're going to do for them, and that's it. So,
is it free?
I believe it is free. I think tickets, is it not free?
Yeah, I will tell you what the Democrats told me yesterday. Okay. They plan to charge $75 a ticket, but the expectation is that the campaigns, whatever campaigns come here, will buy the tickets out of campaign funds and then distribute them to their supporters, who could then attend for free out of their own pocket. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, that's why the Missouri Democratic Party is saying that you need to really, instead of contacting them for the tickets, you should contact the person that you support for the tickets and get those tickets from the campaigns.
In your report, you said they're expecting around 2,000 people. That seemed to be incredibly low when this will be our first opportunity, Colleen, to see all of these people in action that we've been seeing on TV mostly.
Right, that does seem low, and it seems like you could certainly attract a bigger crowd than that, depending on how many candidates come. I mean, that's the question, and it's a little bit tough for the Missouri Democratic Party at this moment, because they don't know exactly who will still be in the race by March 8th, because you have Super Tuesday standing in between there, where 1/3 of the delegates will be awarded on Tuesday. You have the South Carolina primary. So we're going to learn a lot between now and March 8th, and so probably the Missouri Democratic Party doesn't want to expend a ton of energy trying to get Tom Steyer to agree to come, only to have him drop out before the event rolls around.
In fact, there are 18 states who vote before Missouri, and even on the primary day in March 10th, we have several other states also voting with much bigger delegate halls, like Washington State and Michigan. Will people care about Missouri?
It's 13 delegates. It's in the middle. I think to a great degree, a lot of people have written it off as being a red state, so they might not put that much money or emphasis in it. I know we've gotten like one ad from one Democratic candidate. Other than that, the others are saying, well, we're waiting until after Super Tuesday to decide where we're going to spend our money.
Yeah, just to correct my friend, I think there are 68 delegates on the table from Missouri. Regular delegates, not super delegates, just 68 delegates at stake to be awarded proportionally based on the results on March 10th. The reason you might get decent attendance here on March 8th, Nick, is because you mentioned there are 6 states on March 10th, but 3 really matter: Michigan, Washington State, and Missouri, at least as far as Democrats are concerned. Missouri is centrally located. A Sunday afternoon appearance would be on the Sunday night news. just a couple of hours before the primary vote takes place. You can get to Michigan from here if you want to go to Detroit or campaign in some other states. So it's possible that you'll get some of the candidates, but Colleen is exactly right. We don't even remotely know the field yet. He didn't mention Mike Bloomberg in the intro, but he is trying to compete in Missouri. You would expect he might be one of the candidates who would come. And then Joe Biden, if he's still around, he's leading in some polls, and maybe Bernie Sanders. But some of the other candidates next week may no longer be candidates.
Yeah, and that middle ground is really tight. You know, the middle ground. So it really depends upon what happens on Super Tuesday, because if it is still a tight middle ground, then the Missouri Democratic Party, the folks I've spoken to, think that most of the people will still be in the race and will come to Missouri. So
and if they do come here, could we also expect the president, Colleen, because he has been going to the same places where all of those Democratic candidates gather?
Right. He's doing kind of a shadow campaign where he shows up where they are, and
he'll show up in Kansas.
Exactly. Right. And so, but Donald Trump, despite his confusion about whether Kansas City is in Missouri or Kansas after the Super Bowl, has shown a continuing interest in coming to Missouri. He's been here several times, and so would not be surprised to see him here again.
Now, just a warning that when you head to the polls to vote in the upcoming Missouri presidential primary, be on the lookout for a lot of people with clipboards. They're collecting signatures to put a new amendment on the ballot to approve recreational marijuana, and they think the presidential primary day gives them the best shot of collecting the 160,000 signatures they need. Missouri hasn't even managed to work out how it's going to administer medical marijuana yet. There are lawsuits being filed over how the state gave out dispensary licenses. Is it premature to already be taking this next step, Eric?
No, and I think that it lines up with what needs to be done. And I've talked to several other people that tried to get dispensary license and other license in that process, and they are filing lawsuits against the state. They said it was a rigged system. They didn't go by the outline that they said. If you had minorities on your commission or your board, you were supposed to get 3 points or 10 points. You got no points for them. So it's a lot of people were very frustrated about that first round.
Last week on the program, Dave, you mentioned an effort in the state of Missouri to make it harder to actually get constitutional amendments passed in Missouri by making it, instead of a simple majority, a 2/3 majority. If they collected the signatures for this, would that be a hard task for folks to get to a 2/3 majority of voters saying yes to that?
In fact, most people would tell you that a 2/3 margin for any constitutional amendment, marijuana, Medicaid expansion, changes to gambling in the state, a 2/3 margin at the polls is almost impossible to get. 40% of the electorate votes no on everything, regardless of the merits. So I do think that, and that's the point of this, of course, in the Missouri legislature, is to make it almost impossible to pass constitutional amendments. Members of the legislature are upset that the public has its say. Whether that impacts the marijuana petition drive or the Medicaid expansion petition drive, which is still ongoing, is an open question. It doesn't seem like they're ready to change to this 2/3 level.
Now, by the way, if you live in Kansas, don't expect any quick change to current law. No Kansas Legislative Committee has taken up a medical marijuana bill, and this week Kansas lawmakers even rejected several bills to reduce penalties for marijuana possession, which can still lead you to prison in Kansas as a felony offense.
A felony conviction is a heavy burden for an offender around an offense that in many states now is not a crime at all. It's pretty harsh.
So don't hold your breath for change in Kansas on this, Shannon?
I don't think you should hold your breath in Kansas at all. It's very different than Missouri. And I think one of the things in Kansas is that the law enforcement officials are really tweeting in the legislators' ears because they do not want recreational marijuana in the state of Kansas, period, end of story. I've spoken to the DEA, the Johnson County District Attorney, the Johnson County Sheriff, and all of them are opposed to it. And they say, look at what's happening in Denver. Crime has actually gone up, and the DEA believes that it will actually empower folks who are dealing in marijuana from the Mexican cartels who are living in Johnson County, who are in our community amongst us, to lower the prices, to undercut any sort of medical marijuana or recreational marijuana. So I think that they have a big say, and I think they're in the ears of the legislators.
How many people can you make angry and upset all in the same week? Kansas City Mayor Quinton Lucas is finding out. He's facing pressure from arts advocates, allies of healthcare providers, tenants' rights groups, and ambassadors for the Kansas City Film Office. All are upset with Lucas's new budget that eliminates or sharply cuts their programs. Is there any evidence, though, the mayor is changing his position in light of any of those complaints, Colleen?
Not yet. He's kind of navigating the waters here carefully, and he's had a little bit of a honeymoon period since he took office several months ago, and he did some things that were important to him that got some kind of positive publicity in terms of taking away fares on buses. But the budget season is a tough season where you really have to take sides, and he had to commit to some priorities and make some tough decisions and leave some people on the sidelines, giving them not what they wanted. And so he's listening to the feedback and has responded to that. So far, he's not making any big changes to his budget, but we're still in the process of having hearings.
And listening to the feedback, there are 3 budget hearings where you can speak out and give your 2 cents worth on what you think about this budget. There was one last week, but does any of this make any difference if you go to one of these meetings? There's one coming up this weekend.
Sure, it does make a difference. You can be heard. I remember several years ago they were taking money from the American Jazz Museum, and people were outraged about that. People in Kansas City are very defensive about arts. They were outraged. They came to the budget hearings. They were heard, and they got the money put back into the budget. So I believe if enough stomping is done about it, they'll put the money back.
But there's only so much money, though, in the budget. So if you put the money back in on those programs, whether it be for the arts or put money back into Children's Mercy Hospital that feels it's losing money too, doesn't that mean something else has to go? Where would these groups like to see other things cut in the budget?
Maybe, Nick. I mean, the city has a relatively healthy cash reserve now. Revenues are up in everything except the hotel motel tax, but sales taxes are up, earnings taxes are up. What often happens in Kansas City is that the budget recommends a cut in one program or another, and then half of the money gets added back, or 2/3, and everyone seems to walk away happy. I remember Dave Olson, when he was the city manager, one year proposed a 5% pay cut for city workers. And there was an outrage about that, and the council zeroed it out, gave no raises at all. And I talked to him later, and he said that was the point. I knew they were never going to pass a 5% cut. I really wanted to zero raises, but I proposed it because I knew they'd come the other way. I think that's what's going to happen in this case. Money will be found for some of these organizations, although not full funding.
Now, also not happy with the mayor is the head of the Kansas City Police Board. In his new budget, Mayor Lucas adds 10 more police officers to help reverse violent crime in Kansas City. But rather than a pat on the back, the president of the police board says it isn't enough. They're pushing for 6 times as many new officers.
I think we have a serious shortage of officers. That's what I think. And I've not been persuaded otherwise. And I will tell you that my instructions to the chief have been going forward, if we need 65 officers, then that's what we're going to be asking for, is 65 officers.
Now, is there a statistical analysis, Shannon, that says for every additional police officer you put on the street, there's a corresponding reduction in murder, rape, armed assault, burglaries?
It depends upon who you talk to. You talk to the police chief, and absolutely more police officers are necessary, and that will help curb crime. But other people says 65 officers really can't do much. But what I think is interesting about this is that the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department spent $9 million in overtime last year. Adding 65 police officers would cost $3 million. So I think if the chief can prove that that would help him reduce costs, perhaps that's another way to go about it. The police department, if they can curb that overtime with 65 officers, would save $6 million.
Eric.
No, I don't think there's a relationship between more police officers and less crime. I think that's the picture that they want people to believe. But I think if you do an audit and you look, there are probably some people sitting behind desks at 12th and Locust that could be out on the street. There are some detectives that could be solving violent crimes. So I don't know if putting more police officers on the street will do a lot more for violent crime. Rather than putting a car on the street corner, tint the windows, and let people think that a policeman is in the car.
In town this week was the former mayor, Mark Funkhauser. Got to speak to him about a variety of issues, including the issue of crime. And his view was it doesn't matter how many police officers are on the street. It's what those police officers are doing.
Right. There is some correlation. If you had no police officers, you would have more crime. The challenge is always finding that balance, Nick. But this is so important to understand. If Nathan Garrett, the head of the police board, or the chief want an additional 65 officers, they could have them if they could find efficiencies in other parts of their budget. Now, overtime is one example, but maybe you don't spend as much on cars, maybe you spend less on health insurance for your members. I mean, there's a way to do it. What Nathan Garrett and the police chief are trying to do is raise the political pressure on City Hall to give us more money. They already get twice as much as they're supposed to get under state law, and I do think that rankles some members of the council and to some degree Mayor Lucas as well.
They say nothing spreads faster than fear, even though there have been absolutely no recorded cases of coronavirus in Kansas City or in the entire state of Kansas or Missouri for that matter. That does not stop people fearing they may be next. Local news stations reporting this week that many drugstores in the metro are now completely sold out of face masks.
I'm getting 5 calls a day, and when we talked to our suppliers, we were told that there was none available. And then we started getting emails from all 4 of our national suppliers telling us that they had no idea when any more would be coming in.
While finding face masks is proving an inconvenience in the metro, at KU in Lawrence, there are reports of Chinese students being targeted because of the virus. The University Daily Kansan newspaper says one student of Asian descent was asked by a faculty member not to attend class, and others tell the paper they've experienced growing hostilities on the campus. It's led to a warning from university officials who say they now have a zero-tolerance policy towards such behavior. In other parts of the country, there are reports of Chinese restaurants seeing big drops in customers since wall-to-wall coverage of the virus began. Are we seeing any reports of effect on Asian businesses in our metropolitan area, Colleen?
Well, we're definitely seeing kind of fear ramp up this week. Obviously, you saw the president come out and talk about this. He appointed the vice president as the coronavirus czar. We had the case in California be diagnosed this week where the person had not been to China. And so we're seeing an increase in fear, and whether that's a rational increase is certainly up for debate. And there are lots of things that you can do to protect yourself. And at this point, there are only 60 cases of coronavirus in the United States. And so it's important to keep this in perspective.
Last week, we saw on this program Rex Archer, Kansas City's top public health official, saying, take a deep breath. You know, more people are dying of the flu. We've had 4 flu deaths already this year in Kansas City alone. Is that still the advice this week, or has that changed now that the CDC says we can expect it to spread across the country?
It's still that they're saying the same thing. Wash your hands. If you sneeze, cover your mouth with your elbow. Just the same things to prevent the flu would prevent this virus. I mean, the corona is a virus. Flu is a virus. There are certain things to do to prevent viruses. And I think that this has gotten way overblown. I think that the fear is not necessary because, again, we only have 60 cases in the United States. We have 0 deaths at this point. And it seems to be pretty contained here.
Are we in the media responsible for overblowing the story, though, Eric?
Eric Wesson is responsible.
You know, you can never tell. 60 cases, that might be reported cases that we know about. And if it's airborne, whether you're wiping off your computer top with Lysol wipes or anything, you never know, and you never know about these sort of things. So I don't think they're blowing it out of proportion. I think they're letting people know that this is a reasonable possibility.
New epidemic diseases are always a concern in the public because you don't really know what the symptoms are. You don't have an inoculation against coronavirus, or COVID-19 is what they're calling it. So obviously there will always be concern. And in the contemporary media age, with the social media and tweeting and cable channels and alternative sources of information, the ability of that concern to get out of hand, both sort of socially and politically, is very high. And we're seeing some evidence of that. You're right, there is an overreaction, but it is almost inevitable when you have something that appears to be this unknown that can blow up this quickly, and, by the way, is a global phenomenon, not just in one particular country.
By the way, I do need to point out that this will be our last show for a few weeks. We're heading into our spring membership drive. Some people ask me, what do I do when we're not on the air? Well, that's when we actually get a chance to work on some of our big projects, including the next mammoth film from Ken Burns. Having recently brought you country music, Burns is now training his camera lens on the human gene. Want to see it before anyone else? You can. We're hosting a screening and panel discussion March 31st at the Kansas City University of Medicine and Biosciences. We put all the details on the Week in Review page at kcpt.org. We'd love to see you there. Before we dissect the gene with Ken Burns, we track one of our nation's and our city's biggest killers, diabetes. It's blood sugar rising.
Very few people know that diabetes kills more than cancer and HIV together.
the impact of both type 1 and type 2 are absolutely devastating. Why isn't there a war on diabetes?
See that blood sugar rising before anyone else? You can. We're hosting a screening and broadcast panel event for that too. That's March 24th. Those details also on the Week in Review page. You can find it at kcpt.org/KCWIR. Now, if you live in Kansas but work in Kansas City, Missouri, you pay what is called the earnings tax. It's not without its controversy. 1% of your entire salary goes to helping fund a lot of services in Kansas City, Missouri. In fact, it makes up more than 40% of the city's budget. Well, there's been a number of efforts to repeal that tax. Is Kansas about to fight back by doing the same thing? Lawmakers in the House and Senate are weighing a bill that would allow Kansas counties to levy an earnings tax on those who work but don't live there. Is this just tit for tat? Kansas City's being unfair? We need to show them we can do that too, Dave.
Joe Reardon was once mayor of Wyandotte County / Kansas City, Kansas, and he talked about wanting an earnings tax 25 years ago when he was in office because it is a way to get some revenue into city coffers from people who don't live there. That's the whole point in Kansas City, Missouri, is 40–50% of it comes from people who don't actually live in the city. The chances of it passing are practically zero in the state of Kansas and would be close to zero if voters ever got a look at it.
All righty, I'm not going to spend any time on something that has so limited chances. What happens to the money you're already giving in your taxes? How about that? 3 years after Kansas City voters approved a special sales tax to fund East Side development, a Kansas City Star report claims very little of the money has been given out to improve the area. It's intended to help. Of the $16.7 million now collected, $13 million remains unspent. Why is that, Colleen?
Well, a number of reasons, and I think this is a story that's not getting enough attention because voters approve this tax. There's a substantial amount of money going into this tax, almost $11 million a year, that's supposed to be helping development on the east side. And because of developers not being prepared to meet the city's standards for wages and different rules that the city has because of problems with the oversight board of this tax, most of the money has gone unspent. And obviously, this is an area that needs these projects, this boost in development more than any other part of the city, arguably, and to have money sitting on the table is really
why is
troubling.
that happening, Eric?
Because I think the outline and the structure that was put in place from City Hall was flawed. The process in the city in which the money was to be allocated, that was flawed, and there was a lot of things getting held up. I know people that have been waiting 2 years to get their money, and it was already approved. And a lot of the projects that didn't have all their ducks lined up, so they didn't have all their foundation together before they did it.
The financing that was not part of the tax was a problem for some of the developers. Meeting city rules, as Colleen suggests, was a problem. The city's staff was probably inadequate to help them understand what standards needed to be met to get this money on the street. But you can already hear even supporters, Nick, saying maybe we don't need to renew this tax when it expires after 10 years because all of this money is sitting in the bank and not getting to the area that it's supposed to help. And if you drive through that district today, and compare it to what it was in 2017 when this tax was on the ballot, you will see virtually no appreciable difference. That's going to frustrate voters.
Do you agree with that, Eric?
And it frustrates other people.
A couple of projects were shovel-ready and are going. I think Deborah Mann's Child Development Center is going.
Right, a couple of daycare centers, right.
Maxwell's projects are going. But Maxwell knows how the system works, so he knew how to get the financing through.
It's now 4 against 1. A former vice president at Kansas City engineering firm Burns McDonnell is the 4th Republican now to announce he's running to unseat Kansas 3rd District Congresswoman Sharice Davids. What does Mike Beeler think he brings to the table that no one else in this race provides, other than that he's the only male candidate in the race, Shannon?
Well, I think Beeler, his strength, he believes, and is that fact that he's an engineer. You know, Kansas City, the infrastructure in Kansas City is a huge problem. We've got the pothole issue. We've got a lot of other infrastructure issues. So I think that when he is running, I think he's going to compare his background and his talents as an engineer. He's going to focus on infrastructure and things like that.
Sharice's ground game will be overwhelming to him. And Kansas, do they have the same pothole problem as Missouri?
They're all potholes.
Yeah, oh yeah. I live in Kansas.
I've driven through through Johnson County. I haven't hit a pothole yet.
Really?
Alrighty.
I guess you're not
We'll
driving in my
continue to
neighborhood.
monitor that. When you put a program like this together every week, you can't get to every major story making our local headlines. What was the big story we missed?
Funeral services for the KCK crossing guard killed protecting 2 students from a speeding vehicle. Does $1.5 million make up for serving 23 years in prison for a crime you didn't commit? A KCK man finally being compensated by the state 3 years after being exonerated. Kansas Cityans getting their first peek inside the new Kansas City Convention Hotel. It opens April 2nd. And in KCK, 4 months after the T-Bones evicted from their stadium, the team's new owner unveiling his plans to transform the beleaguered baseball venue into a year-round attraction. Former Kansas Governor Jeff Collier joining the White House team. He's been picked by President Trump to lead a rural health improvement panel. Collier, who lives in Overland Park, says it's a part-time gig. Marking 100 years of the League of Women Voters, a centennial celebration Saturday at Johnson County Community College. And who won the Super Bowl? According to Target, it wasn't the Chiefs. The retail chain getting heat for selling posters showing the 49ers winning football's biggest prize.
Alrighty, was it one of those stories or something completely different, Colleen?
I think we should talk for a minute about Lamont McIntyre, who finally received compensation for spending 23 years behind bars for 2 murders that he did not commit.
Thank you, Eric.
Mayor Lucas and the firefighters, I think they're going to be wanting him to step up more up front with the tax that they're trying to pass.
Shannon.
I'm going to pick a different one. I think missing Prairie Village woman Angela Green is going to be a huge story. You can't just die and disappear in this day and age.
Another lawsuit has been filed against Missouri's grossly unconstitutional public defender system that will increase pressure on the legislature to fully fund that office.
And that is our Week in Review. And our thanks to our news reviewers, leading the Kansas City Star editorial board, Colleen Nelson, and from Fox 4 News, Shannon O'Brien. Always on call at your Kansas City call, Eric Wesson. And from the pages of your Kansas City Star, Dave Helling. From all of us here at KCPT, thanks for spending part of your weekend with us.